to accept payments using Stripe Gateway on any website or web application. This tutorial is going to be much better than the Web Dev Simplified tutorial because that one doesn't show you how to use Stripe dynamically. The source code will be available in the description through the GitHub link. We're gonna go ahead and pick up right where we left off in the last video where I showed you guys how to set up all the JavaScript code to dynamically create a cart on your e-commerce website. And what we want to do first is we need to go ahead and create a folder called client because we're going to need a client folder and a server folder to make this all work. So I'm going to go ahead and create my client folder, and then all of the code and content here, I want to go ahead and cut that and move it into my client folder here. And then below, we're going to want to create a server file. So this is going to house our front end code, which is going to be everything you guys see. And then the server is going to house our Stripe integration. So what we want to do here is go to our terminal, open up a new terminal, and I'm going to do this all in my command prompt today. And what I need to do is cd, so change my folder to the server folder. If you guys don't already have npm package manager and node.js installed, you're going to need to make sure you install both of those. But for us, we already have that installed, so I'm going to go npm init-y to create my package.json file in my server folder. So now you guys can see our package.json file is present. And next, what I need to do is install all the dependencies that we're going to be using today. So I'm going to go npm i express because that's what we're going to be using as our framework. Stripe because we need to install Stripe and all their dependencies. .env, which is going to be useful for hiding our Stripe integration keys. And then we also want to install cores to allow for cross origins on our web application that we're creating, and I'll show you guys how we're going to be using that soon. Now we're going to hit enter and let all these dependencies install. And now we're going to go into our package.json and make sure all of our dependencies that we requested were successfully installed, and you guys can see them right here underneath dependencies. Next, we're going to install our nodemon server, which is basically going to refresh our server every time we make a change, so we don't have to do it ourselves manually each time. So we're going to use npm i, and then we need to go --save -dev, and then we need to specify nodemon, and this is going to install it locally only to this project. And now you guys can see that our dev dependencies are showing down here with our nodemon installation. And the last thing we need to do to get all the structure for our server set up is simply create a server.js file. And then sometimes VS Code will do this where it creates it outside of the folder, so make sure that you move it into the server folder if you have this error. And now we have the correct structure set up. And now that we have our server.js set up and all the dependencies installed and everything set up here, what we need to do is start configuring our server. So first we want to go require, and then we want to require our .env file, which we have not created yet, but we will in a second. And we also want to specify at the end .config. Next, we want to create a variable for our express dependency here, and we're going to make this equal to require, and then again, express, just like we did above for the .env. Next, we're going to make a variable called app, and this is going to be equal to our express integration for this web application. Then, so we can successfully allow cross origins here, we're going to use a variable called cores. We're going to make that equal to require.cores, like so. And again, these are all the dependencies that we already installed that are located in our package.json. Now we need to use our app, and we need to use our express dependency here, and we're going to use this as a JSON. Then we want to specify app.use again, and here's where it's going to get a little bit complicated. But what we want to do here is we want to use cores, and if you just leave it as cores here, it will accept it from any origin. But what we want to do is we want to specify the origin that we're going to be using. Specify our origin like so. And this is going to be equal to our local environment. So we're going to go HTTP localhost, and then we're going to be running this on localhost 5500. Again, if you don't specify this, it will work at any origin. But for us, we want to specify the origin just so I can show you guys how this works. Next, we want to go ahead and use our Stripe dependency here. We're going to make this equal to require Stripe inside of the quotation marks. And we also need to specify our secret key here. So here's where our secret's going to go. But we don't want to put our secret directly in our server.js file. So we're actually going to go process.env.stripe private key. And what this is going to do is it's actually going to get our Stripe private key from our .env file, but we have not created that yet. And process.env is just the standard for getting the variable here from the env file. And for now, I'm going to go back to my HTML here, and I'm going to go ahead and open this with my 5 server, which I like better than live server. And you guys can see that it's opening at our specified port right here, which is why we specified the origin as such. And again, when we created this with HTML and CSS and added our integration here, we have a total of 6 different products over here that this pizzeria offers. So what we need to do now is specify each one of these products on the server side. So we'll create a new variable using const, and we're going to call this store items. Next, we're going to create a new map, which is basically an object, but just a little bit more efficient. And inside of this map, we want to have an array. And inside of this array, we're going to have an array for each one of our items. So for example, our pepperoni pizza is going to have an ID of 1. So we're going to specify 1 here, and then we want to create an object right here, and we want to call this price in cents because that's going to be how it works with the Stripe integration. And we're going to specify $14.99 in cents here, and then we also want to have our name specified, which is going to be just pepperoni pizza. And this is going to be the information that we use to actually render to Stripe exactly what our customer is going to be paying for. Now I'm just going to paste in the rest of the items that we have within our website here. So we have 6 different items, each with a unique key value pair here. Next, we need to use our express by specifying app, and we're going to use our post method here because that's going to be how we post this information from our client to our server. In this, we just want to specify create checkout session. And again, we haven't created this yet on our client side, but we will in a second, and it will make a lot more sense once we do. And to make this work more efficiently, we're going to use an asynchronous function, and we're going to do that by specifying async here. If you guys need help understanding that, I'll leave a link to a video here and down below in the comments. And here we're going to pass 2 parameters. First is going to be our request here, and then next is going to be our response, followed by our arrow function syntax. And once we do set up our client-side integration here, what we're going to do is we're going to send JSON data, and we're going to need to get our items out of that JSON data. So what we're going to do is set up a variable and destructure our items like so. We want to make this equal to our request .body, which is going to be the information that comes from our client side here. Next, we want to validate the information that's coming from our client side. So what we're going to do is check if this does have a request.body, or if it sends a request.body items to our server side. We want to check if the information coming in is an array with our isArray method here. And then we're simply going to check our request.body.item. And if our client side does not send this information server side correctly, what we want to do is simply return. So we're going to stop the rest of the function from happening. And then we want to send a response back using res.status, specify 400 here. And we want to send this back as a JSON with an object inside specifying error. And we just want to say invalid request body. I'm gonna accidentally put this parenthesis in the wrong place. This needs to go up top right here. And then since we're gonna be sending these items specified by the user to our server, we wanna make sure that we're not getting any vicious code sent to our backend. So what we wanna do is validate each one of our items being sent. So we're going to create a variable called valid items using our const keyword. We're going to make that equal to items dot filter, and then we want to pass in one parameter called item, and then we simply want to filter through our array. So we're going to start by creating an ID variable here and make this equal to the item ID coming from our front end. Parse our integer here into an integer, and we're going to access that information with item.id. Then we're going to create one more variable called quantity, and we're going to make this equal to, again, the information that's coming from the front end, and we want to parse that into an integer, and we're simply going to call that item.quantity. And what filter is going to do is it's going to return a new array with only the information that passes our function here. So we want to return that information, and we're going to go use our store items variable, which again is our map object up here. And we want to check that our information coming from our front end has an ID. So we're going to go .hasID. We want to make sure our ID is an integer. So we're going to specify number is integer, and again we're going to pass our ID. Then we're going to use and again, and since we only have IDs from 1 to 6, what we want to do here is make sure that our ID that's passed from our front end is greater than 0, but also using our and signs again, less than 7, because we only have 6 items. If you guys want to increase the number of items that you have here, make sure that you increase this number corresponding to how many items you're selling on your website. And we want to do the same thing with the quantity that we're sending here. So we're going to go is integer again, and we simply want to check our quantity coming from our front end. And then we only want to accept certain quantities. So this is going to be up to whatever you guys want in your website. So we're going to say our quantity needs to be greater than 0, and our quantity needs to be less than 21, because we don't want to accept more than an order of 20 pizzas. Now we want to create one more layer of protection here. So we're going to go if valid items, and what this is returning here, since we're using the filter method, is it's returning a new array with the items that pass through this array successfully. So what we want to do is specify our valid items dot length, and if this does not equal our items dot length, we want to stop our function from running, because that means that we have something that is not validating successful up here. So we want to return a response to our front end with an error of a status 400.send invalid item IDs or quantities provided because something failed up here. Now what we need to do is set up all this information so we can successfully pass it into the Stripe API so it can handle it and actually display the total to our customer. So we're going to create a constant called line items, and this is going to be each one of the items that is rendered to the Stripe API for payment purposes. We're going to pass in our valid items, which again is an array, and we want to map through this array. So we're going to use our map method, and we're going to specify our item parameter one more time here, use our arrow function syntax, and we want to start off by creating a constant variable called store item, and this is going to be different from our object that we created with our map, because this is store items, and now we want to specify store item here. And now we want to use the object that we created up here with the uppercase map keyword. So we're going to go store items, and to get values from a map object like we have here, you want to use your get method, and we want to get the parsed int of our item.id, and this is going to allow us to return the information that we need to pass into Stripe. So we're going to return an object starting off with price underscore data, and then inside of price data we're going to create another object that's going to house our currency here, and we just want to specify USD for US dollars. And now we need to pass the product data here, and again inside of this we're going to have one more object, and we simply want to pass the name of our product here. So we're going to specify name, and that's going to be our store item dot name, because we want to access this variable here and pull the name from it, because basically what it's doing is it's grabbing individually each one of our products here, and then we want to go in and get the name property out of the object here. And then we need to specify the unit underscore amount, which is going to be our store item again dot price in cents. And now we just need to get our quantity so we can properly charge them based on the quantity that they selected. So we'll go quantity, and then we simply want to select our item quantity. Now we have all of our items set up, the structure of our server set up, and the validation to keep any vicious code from being sent into our backend. So now we're going to use the try catch to actually create our Stripe session where our users can pay. So we're going to start off with try. In here we're going to create a constant called session, and we're going to make this equal to await. And before we continue, we're using await since we are using an asynchronous function. So you have to use an asynchronous function in order to use the await keyword down here. And then we simply want to use our stripe.checkout.sessions.create, and we want to pass into create an object which is going to contain our payment method types, and for now we only want to specify card, and then our mode is simply going to be payment because we want to accept payments here. Then line items is basically going to serve as our products that we're passing into our session here. So we're going to pass in line items, which again is going to be all the information from this variable here that we use to create each one of our individual products that our users selected, as well as the quantity that they selected. And then we want to specify our success URL, which is going to run if the payment is successful. It will take them here. And so we simply want to pass in a variable called process.env.client URL. And I accidentally forgot to add my backticks here, which I need to add, so I'll go ahead and add those now. What this is going to do once we set up the env file is it's going to take the client back to the order.html page, or whatever page you want to take them back to here, if the payment is successful. We also want to have a cancel URL in case the user cancels their order or clicks the back button in the Stripe payment gateway. So we're simply going to copy this and paste it down here, and if they cancel their order, what we want to do is take them back to the index.html. And keep in mind, you can create different pages if you guys want for success and cancel, but here is where those links will go. And down here we want to respond to our client here with a JSON, and we simply want to change the client side URL here, so we'll specify URL to our session.url, which is going to be our Stripe gateway here. Now if any of this above fails, what we want to do is use our catch here, pass in our error object, and then we want to respond to the front end with a 500 status as a JSON, and then we simply want to log our error message back to our client side. So we'll go message:e.message here. And then now we need to select what port we want to listen to. So we'll create a variable called port, and we'll make that all capital, and this is going to be equal to our process.env.port. And if no port is specified in our env file, we want to default to port 3000. Now we need to listen for that port, so we're going to use app.listen, specify our port variable, and then we simply want to pass in a function without a parameter here using our arrow syntax. We want to console.log. We're going to use our backticks here. Server is running on port. Then we're going to use our $sign and pass in our port variable here, which again is either going to be specified by us in our .env or default to port 3000. And so that's going to sum up all the server-side code that we need now, but it's not going to work yet because we also need to create some client-side code. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new script file in my scripts folder here, and I'm simply going to call this stripe.js. And then within my order HTML, you only need to add it to this one or wherever you're going to be integrating Stripe. So we're going to copy this script tag here, and we simply want to link this to our stripe.js. So I'll go ahead and specify stripe.js here underneath our scripts.js. So now in our order.html, we're linking to both of these JavaScript files here. And I'm going to go ahead and open stripe.js. So first what we need to do is get our form. So we'll create a variable called form, make this equal to document.querySelector, and specify our form element here. And then we want to add an event listener to our form. If you guys are confused about event listeners, I'll leave a link up to a video here and down below in the comments. And we're simply going to make the event that we're listening for here is submit, and then we want to pass a function here along with our event parameter here. And then we're going to specify our event object here within our event listener and simply prevent default. And all this is going to do is prevent the default form submission of your HTML form. And now we just want to specify console.log and say Stripe. And over here, if you open up your console right here and we hit submit, you guys are going to notice that Stripe successfully prints out to our console here. Now that we know for sure that our stripe.js file is working, we want to be able to go to our checkout page and we want to grab the information that the user has selected and input it here into our form. And we're going to need to do this dynamically because it's going to be different from user to user based on whatever they select and whatever pizzas they want. So we're going to create a constant called selected items here, and this is simply going to be equal to an empty array where we're going to store all the user selected items. And then we simply need to specify our order details, which is going to be the information that our user selects on our front end. And we're going to do this by using document.querySelectorAll. And if you guys remember from the last video, if we go ahead and inspect this, each one of our items that we add into our order details here has a data item ID and a data item quantity here. So we need to select those values to dynamically render this user selected information into Stripe. So to do that, we need to use our brackets here and specify our data dash item dash ID, and we need to specify our data dash item dash quantity. And keep in mind that even if you come in here on the client side and change these values to something vicious, like let's say I go ahead and enter PHP, keep in mind that we validated on our server side. So our server will not accept anything that we did not specify that it should accept. So we don't have to be worried about any vicious code being sent to our server because it will not function correctly if somebody tries that. So I'll go ahead and refresh that and get rid of that vicious code that I put in there. Now we need to go through our order details because query selector all returns a node list, which is basically an array. So we can use our array method for each. And then we're going to pass in a parameter of detail and create a callback function. And we're simply going to get our ID with our ID constant, and we want to specify our detail.dataset, and this is going to help us get our item ID here. And we need to go back here and change this back to dataset. Make sure it doesn't try and change it for you there. This is just going to store our item ID that comes from our front end. And then we also want to store our quantity for each one of our selected items by specifying detail.dataset.item quantity. And then basically we're just using these to get the values from our HTML up here. And now we want to use our selected items, which is an empty array here, and we want to push all of the user selected items into this array. And we're going to push these in as objects, and we're simply going to say the ID of each one of these objects needs to be equal to the parse int of our ID variable. So again, this is our variable here, but this is specifying the key for the new object that we're creating. Then we also need to do that with our quantity. So we're going to specify quantity as our key, and then we're going to use our parse int method again and simply pass in our quantity value. And just a quick thing I want to show you guys, if you take that away, you're going to notice that it's giving us an error that we're not using it, because again, this is not using our variable. This is the key in our object. So we need to specify our variable use here. And now that we're successfully getting all the values and all the user input from this order details right here based on whatever our user inputs, what we need to do now is use a fetch request. We want to send that request to our local host 3000, which we specified on the server side down here as either our specified value or 3000. So we're going to go back, and that's what we're doing here on our client side. And we want to go to our create checkout session, which if we look at our server side code, you guys are going to remember that we included a post method with our create checkout session here. Now inside of here, we want to specify all the information that we're going to be sending to the server. Start with our method. If you guys don't know your method, remember that we use post here on our server side code. So that's why we're using post on the front end. And then we need to specify our headers, and this is going to be another object. And we simply want to say our content type, and that's going to be our application, and this needs to be not capitalized, /JSON. We also need to specify our body that we'll be sending to our server, and we're going to send this as a JSON, and we're going to stringify all the values that we're sending. Here is where we pass our items, and then we want to pass our selected items, which is all the user inputted data from our client side code. Then we want to use .then. You guys can see here that it's a promised response, and we want to specify our response here, and we also want to pass in a block of code as a callback function. So if the response from our backend code is okay or working, we want to return our response.json. But if it's not working, we want to return something different. So we'll specify return here. Then we'll specify res.json here again because we still want it to come back as a JSON. And then we'll use .then one more time. And we want to pass in our JSON followed by a callback function. And we want to specify our promise because using our .then is a promise response. and we want to reject this and include our JSON here. So if it runs correctly, we want to return the JSON data, but if it doesn't run correctly, we want to reject it here. .then, and this is simply going to change the URL of our client. So again, remember that we used our URL data here to create our session and eventually route back to the specified success or cancel URL. So now we actually need to use that data on the front end here by simply destructuring our URL that's sent from our server-side code. And then our callback function here is simply going to change the window.location for our client to the specified URL. And this parenthesis actually needs to go down here, so make sure you do it correctly. And lastly, we also need to have a catch method down below, which will catch any errors that we might have coming from our backend. So we'll pass our E parameter, and then we want to console.error our event.error here, so we get the correct error code going back if we have an issue. And so that's going to be all the client-side code that we need for this to dynamically render the information into the Stripe API so it can determine the product ID as well as the quantity. And we're almost done here, guys, but what we need to do is remember that we included our Stripe private key here and our env client URL here. So what we need to do is we simply need to create a .env within our server. So we'll specify that like such. Move this into our server. Yes, we want to do that for sure. And then here we need to simply put our client URL. So this is basically the variable that we're using server side right here. And to access that variable, we need to use process.env our variable name here from our env file. You guys are going to notice that I'm using HTTP localhost 5500 client. So I'm simply using our localhost server here, followed by our client folder, and then over here it's going to go to our specified HTML page that we select. And now we simply need to set up our Stripe private key variable in our env file, and we're going to make this equal to our key. So what we need to do is actually open up our Stripe account. If you guys don't already have a Stripe account like I have here, all you have to do is go to stripe.com and then go into either log in or create an account up here. And once you create that account, it will take you to your home page here, and it will let you use that main account, or you can create an account from here. And again, this is just the home page that I'm on. And then since we're not going live yet, what we want to do is make sure that we're not in this mode here, because this is live mode. We want to make sure that our test mode is successfully enabled. And then once we have that account all set up with our bank information, we want to go to the developers page here. And here it will show you all the API requests and all the information that you need as a developer. So what we want to do is go to API keys. You're going to have your publishable key and your secret key. You want to reveal the test key here and copy that information, which I will do on my own without you guys seeing. So once I copy that, I want to go back over to my .env file and paste the key right here. And keep in mind, all the information in your .env file is sensitive data and data that you don't want to share anywhere. What we're going to do is create one more file called getignore. And then inside of our getignore file, we simply want to specify our .env. And we want to make sure this is in our server folder here. And now if we upload anything to GitHub, it's going to leave our env out of it, so we're not exposing our secret key, because you want to make sure that that secret key is not shared and it's not released by accident, because it will allow other people to get access to your Stripe account, which you absolutely do not want. Now we're going to open our terminal again, and we simply want to go back to the command prompt that we had where we already CD'd into our server folder here, and we simply want to specify node mon server.js. And what this is going to do is it's actually going to start our server file here so we can actually make our API request to Stripe and make our payments. And then you guys are going to notice that there is an error saying that the app crashed. And if you guys run into that error, it usually does a really good job of telling you why. So it says require.cores is not a function, and that's going to be my own error that I made here, because instead of saying .cores here, what I need to do is actually say cores, like so. Now that we have cores correctly added, I'm going to open a new command prompt, cd back into my server folder, and now I'm going to specify nodemon server.js to successfully start my server, and you will know that it's successfully starting because it says server is running on port 3000. I accidentally included parentheses at the end of body, so I need to go ahead and get rid of that. That is my bad, and once I do that, the server is running correctly on port 3000. So for each product that you guys have on your website or web application, you want to make sure that you have the correct IDs for each one, or it will not successfully post and use the Stripe API. So as you guys can see, I have 1, 2, 3, and then on the menu page, I can reuse these IDs if it's the same product, or I can continue creating new IDs for different products. So I'll go ahead and save that. Now if we navigate back to our client-side code, I'll go ahead and refresh that. And what we want to do is remove these items, go back to our home. We're going to add 1 pepperoni pizza and 2 supreme pizzas. Go to checkout. You guys will see that our correct items and quantity are displaying here. And if we go down here, we're not going to worry about the form because we're not doing anything with that right now. But I'm going to open my console and go ahead and hit submit. You'll see Stripe logs, and then it takes us to our Stripe API, and it says we are in test mode, and it says pay the value here, which is the correct total, and it shows 1 pepperoni pizza and 2 supreme pizzas, exactly how we entered it on the client side, pretending to be a customer. And for now, we're in test mode, so it's not going to go ahead and worry about tax. You can do that later on once you go live. What we'll do is write an email in here, and for card information, we're going to enter the dummy information of 42 repeating, put a month in the future, so we'll do 10/25, and then just put 123. And I'll go ahead and put a random name here and a random zip code, like so. We'll go right here. We're going to disable this save for 1 click. And then you can also pay with link up top here. And then we'll go ahead and click on pay. And this will go ahead and process your payment. And now you guys can see that it sends us back to the order.html page, which is the page that we specified in our server to take us back to if it's successful here. Is reopen my Stripe account. Now, if we look at our overview in our developers page, you guys will see that right now at 4 p.m., there was a request to this API here. So you guys will be able to see the API requests here. And underneath transactions, you guys will be able to see your successful transactions here, along with the payment method, description, and the customer, which will log the email address here. And you guys can manage everything right from your Stripe dashboard, like so. If you guys have any questions, I know I threw a ton at you today. Do not be afraid to go down below into the comments, and I will help you out and guide you through the process. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope this video helped out.